All right, welcome in, everybody. Evan Valenti solo here on this Saturday. Adam taking the week off, should be back next week. Happy to be here with Forbes' Chris Grenham, coming off a loss to the Detroit Pistons last night on a Friday night after what was a tough road trip on the West Coast, Chris. They go 3-4 on the West Coast, plus these two games at home. I just kind of lumping them all together because it's been kind of an interesting road trip for the Celtics, and I lumped these two into the end because it kind of encompasses my first point. I'm not wasting any time here. We're gonna get right off, right into this right away here. 3-4 on the West Coast trip, plus the two games home against Toronto and Detroit, and outside of the game against the Jazz, you can make the argument the game against the Jazz is a little bit closer, but the second half, obviously, the Jazz pull away. Best team in the NBA record-wise. They definitely showed it in that game. But the one thing that I take away from this, Chris, this particular stretch of games, is this team has moments where they play extremely well. And you can go back to that Toronto game and find a bunch of clips where I was drooling all over the place with some certain things. We'll get into that a little bit later. But there are times where this team just can't click consistently for 48 minutes. Brad Stevens spoke about that last night after the game against Detroit, how this team lacks consistency, and that's what's really giving them a hard time in terms of taking that next step to being a really good team in the NBA. Chris, in your estimation, what is the biggest reason for the Celtics' inconsistency this year?
I mean, if you're looking at box scores across that stretch and really across the entire season,
Right.
it comes down to 3-point shooting, and their depth seems to be pretty reliant on 3-point shooting. And that's not to say that's a bad thing, because that's just kind of where the game is right now. Like, that's a lot of depth. A lot of cores across the league are relying on 3-point shooting. But for the Celtics, it seems to be a little more drastic. So you look at Toronto on Thursday, the game against Toronto, excuse me, they shot 51%. They made 23s, right?
Yeah.
And last night it was not quite as nice. It was ugly. And then it makes the depth look terrible. So it's a lot of reliant on 3-point shooting, and it's a lot of inconsistent ball movement. So again, going back to the Raptors game, that's the far, far positive end of the spectrum, but the ball is whipping around. They finish with, let me look here, 30 assists. Last night, Friday night, they had 15 assists. So that's double the assists. So you can tell that ball is moving away from Jaylen Brown. It's moving away from Jayson Tatum. And that's when you get guys open. You get an NBA guy open. It doesn't matter if he's a starter or he's a bench player. There's a damn good chance he's gonna hit a shot if he's wide open. So it's a lack of that crisp ball movement, and they kind of just go stagnant. And it's hard because a lot of the possessions you're working with this bench unit, it's Tatum in the bench. And Tatum's style is to beat guys off the dribble. And when there's not a lot of ball movement, at least leading up to that, then it just immediately goes to some ISO work. And it's just kind of like Jayson off to the side, working off the dribble, and then four guys kind of looking at him with the occasional screener coming up. And so that is inherently bad just because it turns into stagnant possessions. And so that's why the trade discussion keeps coming up, just because you need to grab that other wing threat, because when it's Tatum in the bench, which is the unit they always go with, and it's not necessarily a bad unit, but when they go with that unit, it can become pretty stagnant just because there's not a whole lot of movement away from the ball. And on the ball, there hasn't been too much movement either of late.
Yeah, and I agree with you in that sense. When you have Tatum and the rest of the guys,
yeah,
Tatum's this otherworldly player, and we'll get into Tatum in just a little bit. Trust me, we got a lot to talk about in that particular department. But you have a lot of guys with similar skill sets, and those skill sets are very, very small, right? Like if you want to have, and we'll get into more of these things, but like let's say you have the lineup of Tatum and Kemba and Brown, and we'll throw Shemi out there because he's been the starter lately, and Daniel Tice. Well, you got three guys that can handle the ball pretty well and move the ball around in Kemba, Tatum, and Brown. And then you have one stationary shooter, really, in Shemi Ojeleye. And then you have Daniel Tice, who does a lot of the dirty work, but he can spread the court out, right? Mm-hmm. That is a unit that can really thrive because you have so many ball handlers, guys that can move the basketball. But when you have, Jayson Tatum, Carson Edwards, we'll throw Shemi back in there, Grant Williams, and Tristan Thompson. It's just a lot of guys that have one particular skill set. I mean, I'm not trying to say they only have one. Grant does a good job moving the ball around, but, he's not a guy that's going to create offense for himself. I love the way Carson Edwards has been playing lately. And as a guy that has I'm done with the Jeff Teague stuff. Like, I'm just absolutely, I've had it. I'm done. Like, to see Carson Edwards out there, I get a little happy about it. But again, he's very, very limited skill set right now. Still working out a few things, trying to get comfortable on the NBA floor, right? So, to your point, it's Brad Stevens not giving Tatum enough to work with, but yet they don't have a lot to work with. Because I go back to the inconsistency stuff. This injury thing is getting outrageous. I mean, last night, no Robert Williams. Marcus Smart, we know, is going to be out for a bit. Jaylen Brown apparently has knee tendonitis that needs to be monitored the rest of the year. We already know Kemba's having knee, not having knee issues, but his knees are being, carefully monitored throughout the season. Pritchard's coming back from it. Like, it's hard to get a real grapple of this team because they just have so many injuries at key spots, right? They don't have too many backup bigs they can kind of go to, right? They're very now limited in that capacity. You take out Marcus Smart and Kemba Walker in a game, well, now your point guard rotation is all out of whack. Jeff Teague now has to play along with Carson. Like, you see what I'm getting at? So the injury bug it's not just injuries. I'm not going to try to put it all in injuries, but this injury bug prevents this team from getting any sort of rhythm. And this doesn't even mention the fact we haven't even seen Romeo Langford yet. So it's just, at the end of the day, you want to be able to, you watch Toronto and you're like, oh my goodness, this team, this is amazing. And then you get to the Detroit game and it just, humbles you a little bit and reminds you that, like, okay, this team is so much far away from a finished product. And the one thing they really need to work on is being, holding each other accountable and being, ready to step up when they know this injury thing is a serious problem.
Yeah. I mean, your point about the depth having, relatively one-dimensional skill sets is definitely well taken, because there's certainly something to that. You look at what Brad Stevens is working with right now. And again, like you said, the injuries make this a hell of a lot more difficult than it really was expected to be. Coming into the season, we knew that they were going to have a lack of wing depth, and we knew that the bench could potentially be a problem. But the injuries to Marcus Smart, the injuries to Semi Ojeleye last night, like, they pile up, and obviously Romeo Langford, like, they pile up, and there's a trickle-down effect. It makes things difficult, right? Because you already don't have a lot of wings, and say Shemi does have to miss a game, say he doesn't play tomorrow against Washington or something like that. Like, he's been playing very well. You're down another wing. And then it forces more minutes for probably Jeff Teague or another, scorer off the bench. And that's a problem, because you're bringing in these guards like Pritchard and Teague. Now, Pritchard has been tremendous. He's been great. Yeah. He's probably been the best player off the bench. No question. But that makes your defensive versatility so brutal. Like, there's really no way around it. Like, when you're forced to play Teague and Pritchard a lot, your defensive versatility is tough. And it's clear that Aaron Nesmith can't be out there defensively because he's still trying to figure it out. And that's fine, because he is such a shortened training camp, like barely any preseason. No, he played a year and a half in college. Like, it's not crazy to say, like, he's around where he should be. Like, it's not really, to expect him to be a plug and play guy was a little bit unfair. But the one-dimensional style of this bench is, again, I keep coming back to it, but that's why the Celtics need to be active with this TPE, because it's so limiting no matter what direction you go. And Grant Williams has been really good, and that's been a nice perk. And Semi Ojeleye has been really good, and that's been a nice perk. And so is Peyton Pritchard. But outside of them, there's a whole lot of nothing, and it falls off really hard. And yeah, Carson had a nice stretch, but, like, you can't rely on him defensively. You saw against Phoenix, Brad rewards him with a start because he played well against the Clippers. He's just going to get bullied against guys like Devin Booker and stuff. So
Chris Paul versus Carson Edwards is
right. It's just not. Like Devin Booker saw the matchup with Carson Edwards and went right at him immediately. Right. So that's just a tough matchup from the start. Right. And it's hard because Carson is still trying to develop into his own pro style, where he was coming out of college as this volume shooter. He's not going to be a volume shooter in a lineup with Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown and that's just not the way this works. So there's a lot of adjustments that need to be made for a guy like him, but you can't make them overnight. So it's hard to blame them, but I don't know, man. I mean, there's a lot of one-dimensional skill sets on that bench. And I think more important than the scoring is the defensive versatility that it ultimately lacks. And that's a real problem.
Was it rough for you watching Saddiq Bey go off last night?
No, it wasn't rough at all, man. I was having the time of my life. I tweeted that back to Corrales. I mean, I love watching Saddiq Bey play, and I I led that train for so long. To have him, he played very well in the first game of the back-to-back earlier in the season against the Celtics. So to have him go for 30 last night was just life affirming. It was tremendous. I know Celtics fans didn't like it, but man, I enjoyed it. I'm a fan of all things Sadiq Bey.
I caped for. I didn't do it as hard as you did, but he got on my radar. I mean, first off, I have a fiction for Nova guys only because, I long for the days of the older Big East when, rivalries really meant something. In college basketball today, it's a little different. Mm-hmm. But, I always have a soft spot for like the UConn guys, the Villanova guys. Anybody who wants to bring St. John's back to the promised land, I'm totally down for.
Right.
Seton Hall. I mean, I'm down for all that stuff. And to watch and I'm a big Jay Wright fan. So I'm pretty much anybody that comes out of Nova lately is just like a really smart player. And just seems like a guy who should draft. I don't know how, the Jaylen Brunsons of the world. And you're going to go back to all these guys. They all just seem to know how to play.
100%.
And you look at Sadiq Bey and you're like, damn, like that, having him. And I'm not trying to pile on Neesmith, right? As you said, a year and a half of basketball. His shot is good. He needs to find rhythm. He needs to get practice because of the defensive end. He has no clue. And like you look at the end of the game against Toronto on Thursday night, and they go zone at the end of the game. He still has no clue where to be. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting there I'm like, man, this is so tough because he needs to play, but he can't play because he just makes too many defensive mistakes. And if you're going to make that many defensive mistakes and you're not going to shoot well, you're not going to see the floor. But I do want to get back to the inconsistency thing because it does hover around a specific player, in my opinion, as well. And that's Kemba Walker, right? Kemba, as much as, look, he's still finding his way a little bit as he didn't play organized basketball for a very, very long time. He's just coming back into the fray. He's starting to get his feet wet. But you see what happens when he's not totally on for that game. I mean, you look at his past couple of games, he's had some good ones, but his shot has been off in a lot of games. And sometimes the misses, Chris, there were several, what was he, 2 for 14 or whatever against Phoenix on that road trip. Some of those misses were absolutely brutal. A buddy of mine texted me. He was like, you got to be kidding me on this Kemba number. And I said, because he has him on, his fantasy basketball team. I said, honestly, it even was worse than the number because he is clanking shots off the backboard that, basically I would do it in an NBA game. So, I don't want to pile it all on Kemba because he's been really good in certain spurts. He's been not so great in certain spurts. But if the shot's not falling and he's not getting to the free throw line, which he hasn't done a whole lot of this year, they're in a little bit of trouble. Because their defense isn't that great. Let's just get to that point. They need all the offense they can get, and if Kemba's not going to supply it for them, then I'm not quite sure where else it comes from.
Yeah, it's been said a million times, but the whole thing with this team is you got to make life easier for Jaylen Brown and for Jayson Tatum, and that starts with Kemba Walker being effective on the offensive side of the ball. You got to pull attention away from Tatum and away from Brown, and he did that against Toronto. I mean, he was in 30 minutes. He had 21 points. He was 6 of 6 from the free throw line, which is his most free throw attempts in, I think, since he's come back. Yeah.
The year.
So, yeah, you're right. So, that's a positive, and he's moving in the right direction. But you're right. Like, the inconsistencies have been a little more drastic than they have been in the past with Kemba. And it's tough. If he starts getting to the line a little bit more and can find a little comfort inside the arc, because that's really where his issues have been. He was 4 of 20 against Phoenix, and those 4 buckets were 3-pointers. He's just not scoring inside. And part of that is getting to the free throw line. But you need him to be effective just to make life easier for Tatum and for Brown. And when that doesn't happen, again, it's right back to that trickle-down effect. There's nowhere else for that really to go, for that production to go. And so that's a real problem. The thing is, they're going to have to figure it out because for the time being, he's not playing back-to-back. So you're going to have to go against like Detroit last night. You're going to have to play without him, right? So it's not like you can just rely on Kemba having these great nights and helping ease the load off the top of the roster because there's going to be probably one game a week where you're not going to play with him. So that's going to be something they're going to have to adjust to. And it's worth noting that Pritchard has made that portion of Brad Stevens' life tremendously easier, really on both sides of the ball. Pritchard's been pretty good defensively too. That's been a huge that's been a huge impact. But you'd like to see Kemba grab that rhythm as things move forward. But I've said it elsewhere too. it really is like he didn't come back all that long ago. And I'm not going to keep defending him again and again and again, but it does take some time to kind of gain that rhythm back. And it's difficult when he's not playing back-to-backs and he didn't go through training camp. And like, that's really hard. And from a mental perspective, it's probably difficult for him to go back to his old self where he's taking these hard cuts and these hard change of directions and change of pace where, you know, his knee probably still is not 100%. And so that has to be a difficult adjustment too. So in my ideal scenario, in my ideal mind, there's a world where he can slowly work back to his old self in the next month or so.
Where's your concern level at here? Because, you know, this is, again, it's a shortened season. You have, you know, a guy that's not going to play in back-to-backs, and his rhythm is just completely off. And this team, in order to get – look, this team – you go to the Eastern Conference Finals so many times, like, you got to get over that hump. And now, you know, with the consistency that Jaylen and Jayson have shown you, like, these two guys are ready. These guys are ready. They're ready for that next step. But they can't get there by themselves in this Eastern Conference. There are too many good teams. I mean, maybe in the older days of the East, when the West is still stacked. I'm not saying it's not, but, you know, the East has been weaker notably throughout the years. This year, it's not going to. It's, you know, a little bit more even because the Nets have a full arsenal of Kyrie, Harden, and KD, and, you know, you have the Sixers, the different coach, look way different. You know, you're going to need Kemba Walker to be Kemba Walker for you to get past those teams, right? So where are you at here? Because we had Sean Devaney on last week, and, you know, and we got killed for this, and I don't really mind it. The fact that you all are going to kill us for it doesn't bother me at all. But the conversation needs to be had. He's like, I've called up some people around the league, and, you know, you couldn't give Kemba Walker away right now with the way he's playing and the way that contract is. So that's, to me, a little concerning because you're counting on him to be a focal point of your offense to help Jayson and Jaylen, you know, get a little bit of a breather here and there. And if he's not going to do that, this team is nowhere near the team that they need to be to get to the NBA Finals. So if that's going to be the case, where's your concern level here with Kemba Walker?
Yeah, my concern level with Walker is probably lower than most people for the time being. That leash is shortening game by game, right? Because that inconsistency is still at the forefront. So it's certainly not heading in the right direction, but my concern is definitely lower than most people. Again, for the reasons I mentioned before, I have some confidence that he can kind of regain that consistency and find that rhythm at some point. It's just the situation he was thrust into from a health perspective is a really difficult one. And so I don't think it's fair to fully judge where he is right now, as it will be 3 weeks from now, as it will be 5 weeks from now. That being said, my concern from a Celtics perspective, kind of with what you said, it is a little bit higher just because you have two guys playing at an all-NBA level, right? You have Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum, who are undoubtedly playing all-NBA basketball right now. And you need to, as I said before, make life easier for them. You need to take advantage of that. And so that's why the trade talk is out there. And that's why the urgency among Celtics fans to get Kemba back to what he's supposed to be is so heightened at the moment. And I completely understand that. Yeah, you go on Twitter and there's plenty of overreactions and people are freaking out. Yeah. And that's just what Twitter is. Whatever, that's fine. But I think to expect Kemba to be full boat right away was a little bit of a reach. However, he hasn't been good and he's been inconsistent, and that's certainly a problem. But I think that the concern with Kemba is what it does to the ceiling for the Celtics. From a personal, like, Kemba perspective, I think he'll be okay. But I don't know. I mean, that in terms of trading Kemba, like, I know there's been a lot of chatter about that, but that contract just is really not that tradable. And I talked about this with Nicole Yang and Tom Westerholm earlier this week. There is a lowered trade market for him right now. Like there were years ago where Kemba has this mammoth contract. Well, he's Kemba. So you're willing to take that on and you're willing to try to find some matching numbers, and teams are going to be willing to move forward with that. His market is shrunk at the moment just because of his knee and because of his inconsistent play. And so that contract is definitely a turnoff for teams, whereas in the past teams might have been able to deal with it. So that being said, also, I don't really think the Celtics are looking to move Kemba. I mean, I'm sure there have been discussions maybe in the offseason, maybe there will be again, because that's just the way front offices work. But I don't think that's really an option going forward right now.
Yeah. Did a little pessimistic stuff off the top, just because, look, we're a little reactionary coming off the loss last night at the hands of the Detroit Pistons. But I do want to flip this to a very positive direction, Chris, because one of the things I've been super excited about, really happy about the last couple of games, is Jayson Tatum. Because I don't know if anybody's noticed, it's fun to watch when he has the ball in his hands because he can do a whole lot with it. 27 assists in the last 4 games, 7 a game. And that span, only 4 turnovers total in those 4 games. And as I watched it, I thought, again, I go back to the Raptors game as sort of a crutch. And look, we're talking about, not a ton of games already this season. But I go back to that Raptors game, and I looked at the way that floor was spread out. When you had Kemba, Tatum, Brown, Ojeleye, and Tice on the floor at the same time. With Tatum having the ball in his hands, you see how deadly this offense can be because you have 5 guys spread out. You can run 4 around 1 or 5 out entirely if you want to. But the floor is spaced, and it's really great because you have 2 guys, maybe 2.5 of Kemba, that can beat you down off the dribble one-on-one regardless. So you got to shade extra attention that way. So it allows you to get wide open 3-pointers for a career high night for Semi Ojeleye. Daniel Tice has been shooting the ball really well lately. You can allow guys like Brown, Tatum, and Kemba to work a little bit more off the ball. If Tatum's at the ball in his hands, obviously Kemba and Brown can work a little more off the ball. And if you have Kemba, locked in as an off-ball shooter, Chris, life is great. So in my estimation here, I would say the best version of the Celtics in 2021 has Jayson Tatum playing point forward the rest of the way. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a nice option to go to if you're Brad Stevens. You can have him as the primary ball handler for various stints just because, one, it shakes things up. And if you can have, like you said, Kemba operating as a, solid off-ball shooter, that opens up the world for the Celtics offense. But more than anything, I think it opens up things for Jayson Tatum's offensive game because go back a year ago, maybe a little more, he's this, I'm going to break you down off the dribble and I'm going to get to the cup, and defenses know that. There wasn't a whole lot of what I want to say versatility to his offensive game. He was a bit one-dimensional, as a lot of young guys are. He was extremely good at that one dimension, much better than most guys. So that helped. But I think from a defensive perspective, it makes the Celtics so much tougher to guard when he's able to do this and he's able to work you off the dribble. And it's interesting because that Raptors game is a prime example of what happens when the supporting cast is hitting those open shots and they're taking advantage of those nice Tatum looks, because he was doing that a decent amount on the West Coast trip and earlier in the season. But you get these cold stints from guys like Ojeleye, guys like Pritchard, whatever, where they're not hitting and you don't see the assists in the box score. And so people don't really pay attention to it as much. He's been really good off the dribble as that playmaker this season, much better than he has in years past. And that is a huge positive because, like you said, if Kemba isn't, well, one, if he's not playing in a back-to-back, and 2, if he's not playing as well as you would hope, then you kind of lose that solid primary ball handling option. And so the fact that you can now turn to Tatum and even turn to Jaylen Brown, right, because he's shown the ability more so than ever in his career this year to, kind of run pick and rolls and act as that ball handler too, which was, if I told you that a couple years ago, you would have laughed at me.
You told me last year.
Right.
Last year, Chris, I would have been like, no, I literally was on a podcast this year and somebody was like, yeah, Brown's going to average, 5 assists a game some year. And I looked at him. I was like,
right. You think they're crazy.
Absolutely no way Jaylen Brown's going to average 5 assists a game this any point in his career. And here we are, and he's averaging about 4 a game. So I look like a complete idiot at this point.
I mean, but when you can't really guess that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's those 2 guys. If you can run the offense through them, again, you make Kemba's life a little bit easier. Mm-hmm. But, when he doesn't play, you still have those options. And it's important for Tatum as he takes the next step into superstardom, which we all think he's going to get. I mean, is he there already? We don't know yet. He's this like high-end star right now. That superstar level is the guy that can really create for others, throughout the rest of the game and find, pick his spots a little bit differently. But, the point Tatum stuff, I just look at the way the floor's spread out. And I look at like where everybody's standing in their own, and with Tice, you want to run a 1-5 or 3-5 pick and roll with Tice. just the floor is much more spread out. It makes the help defense just really, commit to something.
Mm-hmm.
And as Jayson Tatum learns how to react to those commitments, life's going to get a lot easier for that Celtics offense. And I looked at that and said, that's the way they have to play at the end of games when things get, tight and physical and, every possession matters a little bit more. That's the offense I want to see at the end of games, because it seems like that gives them the most opportunities for guys 1 through 5 all the way around the floor.
Now think about how much better, and I keep going back to it, but think about how much better that floor spacing will be if you get another wing threat, right?
Right.
And Romeo Langford will be a huge addition when he ultimately comes back. But in my mind, he's more of an addition on the defensive side of the ball. That's what he showed in his rookie season more than anything else, is that he can, in his second year, like he can contribute on that end. And his offensive game is still coming along a little bit. If you can get a shooting threat on the wing, it helps that spacing so much, because Jayson Tatum is doing a lot of this primary ball handling and a lot of this distributing with relatively limited floor spacing. Like, that's a really difficult thing to do, but he's so good off the dribble that he can make it work much more than a lot of other guys. And so that will become so much easier for him if they're able to get, say they get 2 mid-level guys. I don't know. They go get Garrett Temple or someone who's on the wing who might not be the flashiest guy, but he helps that floor spacing, and the defense has to pay attention to him a little bit more, because right now they can shade onto Tatum even when he has the ball from a so much easier perspective. I mean, it's tough. So I think that would help a lot. But bottom line is, it's opened up things for the Celtics offense to another level, and Jaylen Brown as well as a primary ball handler. So I totally agree. That's been a huge bright spot.
I love the fact that they can give the ball, like, let's say, Tatum's on one side of the floor, shading more towards the right, and Brown's more on the left, and he starts to attack the basket, and you have Brown's defender shift over. Well, the one thing I love about Jaylen Brown, and I'll make this relatively quick, is I love that if he sees a guy backpedaling, he just goes right at him.
Yeah.
And you see it a lot in transition where I'm like, oh no, kick it out. Jaylen just keeps going and finds a way to control his body to get square to the basket and lay it in with either hand. And I'm like, you know what? Geez, that's a play that you don't see early on because guys aren't strong enough yet. But you looked at Jaylen's body as a rookie in the league, and you're like, that guy's when he puts muscle on, he's gonna be a problem, because he's already physically gifted at such a young age. Here he is at age 24, and now guys are just bouncing off him. And once he gets hip to hip with someone, you're done. You're dead. Because your back is facing the basket, and he can run forwards a lot faster than you can backpedal. So once he gets hit to somebody, see you later, bye, forget about it. And then he has the wherewithal now that if he gets by the first level of defense, he has a help defender come at him, he can locate the open guy, and then all of a sudden the ball starts swinging around, or that person takes an open jump shot.
He never used to be able to do. He never used to be able to do that.
But you've been tiptoeing around this subject, and I didn't really have this planned until later on the podcast, but screw it, let's just do it now. The trade deadline's coming up in about a month-ish, right?
Yep.
And Boston is got that giant TPE. They have also have some smaller TPEs at their disposal. And the smaller one I mentioned first, I think it's the Cantor one. That's for roughly like 5-ish million, because the sexy name now on the Twitter trade market for all Twitter fans out there is John Collins of the Atlanta Hawks. And look, if you don't follow Ryan Bernardoni on Twitter already, you should, folks. Just do it. He's very smart, especially with cap stuff. There are cap complications of trading for John Collins. It might not be now, but further down the road, you have to say bye to some people, which would be really tough. But the John Collins thing, like, I'm all for the addition, but the fact that you'd have to say bye to guys down the road makes this a much tougher acquisition. And plus, frankly, Chris, I don't think Boston has the players it would take to get a guy like that, in my opinion. Do you?
I don't. I mean, yeah, it's a nice prospect to think about them getting John Collins. I mean, sure, he'd be a terrific addition to that front court. I mean, he's a tremendous player, but there are, like Danger Cart was saying, like, there's just not a whole. You're tightened from a salary cap standpoint moving forward with him, right? So he's going to require a lot of money moving forward. And I don't know if that's the direction the Celtics are looking to go. If they can work it out and they're willing to go into the tax a little bit more down the line, like, sure, it's an option, but I don't think that's as likely as some of the 3-and-D guys that are out there, some of the just some of the wings that we've talked about in the past. Obviously Harrison Barnes has been talked about a ton, but
yeah, you wrote an article on Forbes about this, about like the top guys in the TPE possible realm here. You threw out Harrison Barnes, Thad Young, Larry Nance Jr. is on that list as well. Do you have you've advocated, I think, for Barnes in the past. Do you think that's the perfect guy?
I do think he's the perfect guy, but I don't think he's going to be available. So which is a major caveat, right? So from a fit perspective, like, he is what you need. And I think if he's got a solid contract where you're not going to, like, PJ Tucker is a short-term fix, right? He's gone after the season, unless you want to re-sign 35-year-old PJ Tucker, which I don't know if that's what they're looking to do. That's a fix where, by post All-Star break, hey, Nesmith, he's not going to contribute this year. And Romeo Langford, he's going to be limited this year. So we need a short-term fix at the wing, and hopefully we can rely on Nesmith and Langford next year. So then you go after a guy like Tucker. Harrison Barnes is a guy who could honestly start against certain teams on this team, and he's under contract moving forward, and it's not a crazy contract. It's decreasing in value moving forward. The only problem is Monte McNair is not going to want to give him up if they keep winning, right? They're currently 12-13. They're 10th in the Western Conference. And the Kings are, I saw, I think it was, I don't know, it might have been a report from The Athletic, but it's not out of the realm of possibility that if the Kings continue winning and they stay toward a play-in spot, not out of the realm of possibility that they're buyers at the deadline, right? So that could really go in any direction. It could, if say they lose 5-6 in a row here, then they could ideally become sellers. And the Celtics, I would think, have to really go hard at Harrison Barnes because I think he is the perfect candidate. But again, even if they do lose a couple games, are they willing to part with a guy who's been so central to their success right now? He pairs really nicely with De'Aaron Fox and Tyrese Halliburton. So I don't really think that's as realistic a possibility as, say, a Thad Young with the Chicago Bulls, who I think just provides another really nice threat off the bench, because that's what the Celtics need, right? They need depth of any sort at this point. And Thad Young isn't a crazy expensive option. He's a vet who knows how to kind of fill a role. He's come off the bench in his career. He started in his career. He's been relatively versatile on both sides of the ball, and he's a good defender. And so I do think those sort of options, probably excluding Barnes, those are probably more realistic than the John Collins conversation. I'm sure the Celtics will look into it. I mean, God, Danny looks into just about everything, but I don't know. Cap implications down the line, like you mentioned, seem to hinder the chances at John Collins, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'll before we keep going here, I'll read Danger Cart Ryan Bernardoni, his particular riff on this. And again, there are a lot of really great cap guys out there. Ryan is
he's really, really smart.
Near the top of them. And I'll just read what he said. Quote, if the C's trade for John Collins, they're either committing to signing him for a ton of money or hoping to recoup one pick in the sign-in trade for renting him for the playoffs. If you sign him long-term, you're going to have to move Kemba in the offseason and might lose Smart after next year. And I'm just going to leave it there because the thought of losing Smart at all bothers me. He's just the kind of the lifeblood of this team, and he's a guy that, again, impacts winning. So if you're going to trade for John Collins, be ready to potentially say bye to Marcus Smart. The Kings
and Ryan's right. Like, this is a guy who turned down a $90 million extension this year. Like, you're going to have to pay him a lot of money. So
he wants a max deal. He wants 100% max deal. And to be honest with you, he's pretty good. So especially in a world of free agents that it might not be. Some guys might get snagged up, and then all of a sudden there's a bunch of money out there, but for not a lot of guys. Like, signing, Jaylen Brown to the contract they did when they did was amazing because there was so much money available, $120 million for Gordon Hayward, which was worth it, by the way. I was wrong about that. He's been unbelievable in Charlotte, but that kind of money for Gordon Hayward would have been there for Jaylen Brown. That's just my point. Mm-hmm. You have the Harrison Barnes thing is so infuriating because, like, look, the Kings, you're not going to win anything. Like, you're in 10th place. And this is I get frustrated because this is a year where if you want to tank and bottom out, this is the year to tank and bottom out. There are so many good guys that are going to be available in the lottery this year. You can name a whole bunch of them, and like everybody's top five is much different. And even after the 5, there's a bunch of guys like 6 through 10 that could be really good impact players. Like you don't have to get, Cade Cunningham or Evan Mobley or Jalen Suggs or Jonathan Kuminga, who played really well yesterday. I mean, there are so many guys that can have a significant impact on your team that are much better for your cap going forward, et cetera, et cetera. The Kings thing will continue to bother me, but they, look, I don't run the Kings, so it's not my thing. My question for you is, would you rather overpay to get Harris? Like, let's say, like you have 2 deals on the table. One's for Thad Young or whatever your favorite, like, second prospect or second trade target is, and Harrison Barnes. And, the Kings like, yeah, we're willing to move Harrison Barnes, but you got to give us a little something extra. Would you be willing to go that extra mile to get Harrison Barnes versus Thad Young or Larry Nance, who I like quite a bit, or, other, ex-player here guy?
Yeah, I would give up a young player and some draft capital for Harrison Barnes if that is an option. Who knows if that'll be an option, but I certainly would. Comes back to what we were saying earlier. You have 2 players playing at an all NBA level right now, right? You need to take advantage of that, and you can't just sit by and kind of let, I like the idea of giving up a young player and some draft capital for Barnes significantly more than going and getting, for example, 2 mid-level guys. Like, I just think that's far more appealing. And I think the market for some of the guys the Celtics should have had interest in has shrunk a little bit because of injuries. You have Aaron Gordon, who went down with a nasty ankle sprain. Yeah. He would have been another really nice target. Again, that's someone who you probably got to throw some significant draft capital and a young player at. So again, asking price there, very high. Larry Nance Jr., another name who the Cavs might not even be looking to part with because they have guys further up their trade totem pole that they need to get rid of before 28-year-old Larry Nance. But again, his market is kind of dwindled now because he just had surgery on his finger and he's out 6 weeks. So the market has shrunk a little bit. And I think Barnes has continued to be the ideal option. If the Kings are willing to listen, which still remains a very important and valid question, then I think the Celtics should be willing to part with a young guy and part with some draft capital, because you have to take advantage of their current situation and make life easier for the way Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum have played, which is incredible.
Right. I want to finish up here, even though it wasn't quite the order I wanted to go in. I do want to take some time to just throw some praise at Shemmy's way and at Grant Williams' way, because those 2 guys have been playing out of their mind. Shemley especially. Yeah. And, he goes down to the injury last night, obviously, because that's the way the season's gone so far. But coming off a career-high 24 against Toronto, the shot looks – I mean, he had a weird – and people pointed out, he had a weird stretch where he didn't look like he was finishing the way he normally does. Like, he has a really nice, strong, like, set base when he finishes, and he holds that extension. It seemed like he was rushing a little bit, but now he's come back to his what I think older form. He's just hitting shots left and right. And, it shows the value of that PJ Tucker type, a guy that you can stick in the corner to keep the defense sucked into that corner. And as people move away to kind of crowd the paint, having a knockdown shooter in the corner like that is so valuable. If Shemmy can prove that he can do that at a consistent level, then the need for a PJ Tucker type of guy is gone, because essentially what you're getting is, maybe not as versatile PJ Tucker, but doesn't cost as much, is on your books, potentially long-term, because I think Shemmy's contract's coming up very shortly. I think they guaranteed his spot this year. I think he's a free agent next year. Am I right on that? I think so. Right. Yeah. Just the value of having a guy like that. And you don't need 20 from him. If they can get between him and Tice 20 a game, then you have a much more potent offense that spreads the floor. And Shemmy, has gone from, a second-round pick who we all loved because he had the NBA body right away and looked like he could defend. And, he did a great job covering Giannis early in his years. As Giannis has gotten stronger, that's gotten a little more difficult to do. No fault on Shemmy's, but he's been out of his mind lately. Grant Williams, after, 0 for 20, whatever, his first 23s in the league. He's now up to, 40, 40. He's 52 from 3 in his last 10 games and 44% from 3 on the year. Those 2 guys, again, proving that you don't totally need a PJ Tucker if these guys are going to give you that.
Right. And I think from the Celtics perspective, you, in hitting that trade market, you would just be hoping for an additional guy, right? Because you're going to get games, not a whole lot, but you're going to get games like the Toronto game where Shemi can't miss. And no, you're not expecting him in those good games to go 6 of 8 from 3 every
Right.
time. That's just not going to happen. But you can get him hitting a couple threes and hitting, a couple shots inside the arc where it just opens things up and makes life a little bit easier when that bench unit is out there. And Grant is the same way. Grant goes through spurts where he'll play 25 minutes and then he'll play 9 minutes another game. He's just kind of all over the place, but he's become increasingly reliant from deep, and his defense has been so good. I mean, that West Coast stretch, he played some significant minutes and he was really good shooting from 3. So like you said, that makes life a whole lot easier. And that's been a huge development. So while all of us critique the Celtics depth chart and critique the wing depth, it is important, and I'm glad you brought it up, to note, hey, there's been some significant improvements in the offensive games of Semi Ojeleye and Grant Williams. And that's a huge burst. And those two guys, you already know, like, the versatility on the defensive end and the skill sets on the defensive end are there. So Brad is willing to play them significant time just because they can hold their own. So yeah, that's been a huge plus.
And what's great is, like, with all these injuries, Shemi's getting forced into the starting lineup here, right? Yep. And it's, you go from a bench player who barely had to fight to get, playing time until very, very recently, like this season, to come in, and start with this group and knock down shots is great for his confidence. And they're going to look, folks, they're going to need probably both of Shemi and Grant as we get in the playoffs here. They're going to need both those guys to play at a high level. And if those guys can find some rhythm and get comfortable and as you get closer and closer to the playoffs, start to become more reliable for the Celtics, this is only going to be a good thing for Boston. Again, we talk, we've mentioned a million times adding a Harrison Barnes type, right? But then as you push that depth down and you start bringing those guys off the bench, life's a lot better for you. If you're bringing 2 guys off the bench that are shooting 40% from 3, and then you have Peyton Pritchard as a third guy shooting 40% from 3, you become a totally different team. And that's something that makes the Utah Jazz very difficult to guard. I mean, we all watched it happen. They have how many guys that shoot 40% from 3? It feels like all of them do.
I was going to say, it feels like 14. It feels like their entire roster. Yeah.
Every guy but Gobert shoots like 38% from 3. And as you watch that team and how the ball moves and how they find open shooters, you look at that and you say, maybe we gotta find a way to emulate that a little bit if we can. And Boston, by getting these 2 guys some playing time with that starting unit, is only going to help going forward. And watching Shemi do his thing has been, again, the game against Toronto was like an otherworldly experience, because it was like, you looked at halftime and you look at the box score and you're like, oh yeah, Jaylen and Jayson have been moving the ball around pretty well, but holy cow, the league scores Shemi Ojeleye and Peyton Pritchard's right by. That's not how you draw it up, but that's the kind of stuff you're going to need, because Jayson and Jaylen, as good as they've been, they can't do it all by themselves.
Yeah, you just have to rely on your core, and you have to rely on your supporting cast. That's just what you need to win. I mean, you look at any championship team, that's what you need. And it, like we were saying, I mean, Tatum and Brown's ability to act as distributors, like, that makes it even more important that those guys can hit their open shots now moving forward. But I really am happy that Shemi's been able to kind of come into his own here a little bit, because everyone knows this, but he works unbelievably hard, and he's just kind of kept his head down, and he's had a lot of ups and downs in his tenure with the Celtics. And so I think it's pretty commendable that he's been able to keep his head down and just work his tail off. And now he's certainly seeing dividends from that. So I'm happy for him, because Shemi's just a really good guy too, which is nice to see. But yeah, huge help. Him and Grant are a major plus moving forward.
You got anything coming up, working on for Forbes that you want to tease here?
Probably a whole lot of trade talk and increasing draft talk as we move forward. I'm under the camp that the Celtics should consider trading their first rounder this year, just because of the lack of draft spots, and probably, again, taking advantage of those 2 All-NBA guys they got on their roster. So some draft talk in the future as well, because I'm obsessed with the NBA draft.
And more, just more Peyton Pritchard fluff pieces.
Oh man, you can always count on me. And it would have been 10 times worse if they had drafted Sadiq Bey. So you should consider yourself grateful that wasn't the case.
Well, no, I think they should have drafted Sadiq Bey because it would have been. Again, I'm not trying to pile on Neesmith here. Seems like a good kid, but like Sadiq Bey, right now, you'd have another rotation piece, and life's a little different. And trading for somebody with a Sadiq, like, look, Pritchard is off the table of any discussion I'm having with anybody about trades.
I think Celtics fans for the most part are right on board with you. Yeah,
I'm completely no way. There's absolutely no way I'm trading Pritchard. I'll leave you with this one though. Is Rob Williams on the table?
Yeah, that is always the question, right? Well, it depends on what you're getting, but I would say he's certainly on the table in various discussions. Yeah. But it's hard. Like, is Tristan Thompson on the table? Like, what kind of value does he have now that he's tradable and you could move that contract, which could maybe make things a little bit easier?
That's the only reason why he's available is because that contract is the right number.
Right.
That's the perfect number.
Yeah.
This is the thing that we've talked about for years with the Celtics is they don't have many contracts at that number.
Yeah.
And that makes life, like, as people want to talk about trading for Nikola Vucevic, right? It's impossible unless you add Tristan Thompson to make the salary work out. So I think Tristan's been playing well, right? I think him and Tice, now that they're not playing at the same time and they've been able to kind of find their own rhythm a little bit, I've enjoyed the Tristan Thompson experience lately. The problem with Thompson is that number is the exact number you're looking for when you're looking to find tradable contracts. And Smart's is the same way. But like, you have to pry Smart from my cold dead hands before you get him off the Celtics, right?
Yeah.
So, there are casualties here. I mentioned Rob only because, there is some maybe untapped potential with Rob, but
definitely,
again, I love the guy to death, and I love watching him play. And he does like 7 things a game where you're like, holy cow, I can't believe he did that. And then he does 7 other things a game where you're like, I can't believe he did that. Like, what are you doing? But, if it's for a significant upgrade, I would be willing to do it. And it would hurt a lot because, we've all invested so much in the Time Lord. But
I mean, I think you do have to at least look into that market, at least tap that market a little bit, just because he has more trade value than a lot of the other pieces on the Celtics roster. Yeah. But I do still think, like you said, there's a ton of untapped potential there. And I think he's made some really nice developments in his first couple of years. You just hope that those next steps start to move forward. But yeah, who knows? I mean, it'll be interesting to see the way they approach this deadline in late March.
Yeah. Chris Grenham of Forbes, formerly of CLNS. Good to see you, buddy. Adam should be joining me next week. For all of you out there, hope you have a great Valentine's Day. Enjoy your weekend here. More Celtics games coming, of course. More content at CLNS. Make sure you subscribe not only to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and on YouTube, but subscribe to the CLNS media page on YouTube as well for more content. You have the post-game show all the time. You have other, various shows throughout the week, including ours. You get live press conferences from Brad Stevens and the gang. It's a great place to get all your Celtics content. Again, CLNS Media on YouTube. Thank you, Chris. Talk soon, buddy.
Thanks, man.